I'm very excited to welcome Bruce McNamer to Google. So Bruce is the president and CEO of TechnoServe, one of our most important and earliest partners. Bruce has an amazing background, a JD MBA from Stanford, a former Peace Corps volunteer in Paraguay. He has worked in investment banking. He's been a consultant. He's worked at 3 high-tech startups, all of which I think has prepared him well to take a business approach to poverty alleviation. TechnoServe is the recipient of one of the first Google.org and Google Foundation grants of $500,000. TechnoServe takes an approach we love at Google towards poverty, which is working with entrepreneurs in countries to develop jobs, develop opportunities, and develop income for themselves. We are working with Bruce on an entrepreneurship development program in Ghana, and the centerpiece of which, or part of which, will be a business plan competition, as well as providing seed funding for the entrepreneurs. So with no further ado, welcome to Bruce.
Thanks, Cheryl, and thanks all of you for coming out. I think maybe it's appropriate at a tech talk that we start with some very low tech, and we're going to try to show a very quick video that I hope just gives you some sort of flash images of kind of what TechnoServe does. And I wanted you to see that, and my marketing department insisted that you see it. So this takes all of about 3 minutes, if we can.
Shrinking the distance, but not the distinction, where the line between the haves and the have-nots has grown. We know our world is a global village, linked by global trade, communications, technology, and environmental concerns. Shrinking the distance, but not the distinction, where the line between the haves and the have-nots has grown wider and more intolerable. We know that closing this divide requires one-world thinking and practical solutions. For real change to evolve, we must go beyond revolving cycles of aid relief. We know the road to consistent economic growth is driven by investment in job and wealth creation, and we know how. We know how to create
circumstances to help people to help themselves. We know how to help empower men and women in poor rural areas of Latin America and Africa to build businesses that create income, jobs, and economic growth for their families, their communities, and their countries. What we do is identify entrepreneurs, guide them in planning, marketing, operating and expanding their businesses with appropriate techniques.
What we do is empower small and medium-sized businesses to help them develop business plans, secure financing, and find markets to distribute their goods. What we do is change the economic landscape and plant seeds of opportunity, impacting whole communities, entire regions, and countries. What we want now
is to multiply the results, press our success, and expand the reach of our economic empowerment model.
What we want now is to spread the word on how a market-based approach using sustainable business practices to address poverty can work. What we want
now is to add to our ranks of investors with government, NGO, and corporate strategic partners. What we want now is your
support. For every $1 spent, TechnoServe is realizing a $3 return on investment.
Turning global poverty around.
From cycles of despair into ever-widening circles of success.
From the ground up.
Empowering entrepreneurs, one business at a time.
TechnoServe. Business solutions to rural poverty.
And we've actually got another couple of video clips, and I'd love your feedback at the end of this if you think these actually tell our story. As Cheryl said, our approach is one that's very consistent, I think, with what motivates people at Google and has motivated this organization from the start. And that is that entrepreneurship provides powerful incentives for organizing effort for, in our case, and in poor parts of the world, for motivating people to help themselves. We start with the premise, and you've heard it all before, that it's one thing to give a man to fish, but teach a man to fish and you affect his life permanently. Our mission is, as Cheryl had alluded to, is to help entrepreneurial men and women to do just that. And the way that we do that is, I think, captured pretty succinctly in the tagline that you heard. We're about business solutions to rural poverty. And that's what we do. And we've actually been doing that for a very, very long time. We were started about almost 40 years ago by an entrepreneur. Ed Bullard had started and run a manufacturing business in Connecticut, spent about a year with his family in Ghana as part of a religious mission, and came back thinking, I know some things about business. I've now had an exposure to poverty. I think the things that I know about business could be helpful in alleviating some of the problems that I've seen in Ghana. He left the manufacturing business and started TechnoServe. And our approach since then has taken our lead from Ed. It's markets can work for the poor. It's start in a community. Let's identify market opportunities for addressing the problems that communities face, and then let's work together to build businesses to address those problems. TechnoServe ourselves, we work in Latin America and Africa, and have for most of that time. Right now we have offices in about 11 countries, 6 in Africa and 5 in Latin America, and we do work in other countries as well. We have about 350 people working for us worldwide, and only 25 of those in the States. Most, as you would expect, are out in the field doing work for us there. Now, I've said that TechnoServe is about business solutions to rural poverty. I think the thing I'd add to that, it's business people thinking about business solutions to rural poverty. And I think that may be different from a lot of people who work on these issues in the nonprofit world. My background, as Cheryl said, is in business. I have a private sector background until a year ago. But my background is not unusual for TechnoServe. Most of my senior managers, well, actually 6 of our country directors come out of McKinsey, as do our 2 regional directors. I spent some time in McKinsey as well. So there's a little McKinsey mafia even within TechnoServe. As a matter of fact, I think we're the largest nonprofit employer of former consultants anywhere in the world. But the remaining country directors even, and each run a program, come from a business background. And again, most of the people who work for us in the field, Tanzanians, Ghanaians, El Salvadoreños, they come from business backgrounds. They may have MBAs from the local management schools. They may have worked for a consulting firm in the country. And I think that legitimizes us in the eyes of the entrepreneurs with whom we work. And I think it's something that you all can relate to. And I think part of what I want to share with you in this discussion is the idea that the set of skills that we collectively have as we think about entrepreneurship, as we think about building businesses, are very relevant to some of the most pressing problems in the world. And there are ways that each of us can contribute to solving those problems, applying what we know. I want to talk about our own approach to the problems. You know, how do we do what we do? And it starts with, I should give you a little more history on this. As I said at the start, we used to start in communities, very poor rural communities, and start there and say, okay, we're located in a community in, say, Ghana or Tanzania. Starting here, what are the possible markets for what this community can grow, produce, etc.? And that worked pretty well for us. I think, though, at about 25 years, we realized that perhaps that's not the most scalable way to approach the problems of poverty, to get at it at the sort of size and scale that we wanted to do it. So for the last 10 years, we've shifted that around a little bit. So instead of exclusively starting in a community base, we've said, let's start at a country level. Let's think really smart about what are the opportunities for this country. If you think about real sources of sustainable market advantage, is it competitive advantage or comparative advantage? Start from there. Pick some sectors or industries where you think, actually, you could build businesses here, and then you could leave, and those businesses would survive and thrive because the people here are particularly adept at that because they have some advantage that will enable them to thrive in the market. And that has been a shift in our own thinking such that today we'll go into a country and we'll do just this. And because we're focused on rural poverty, a lot of times we're thinking about agricultural products. So we'll look broadly, and let me give you an example of going into Mozambique and saying, wait a minute, there's lots of opportunities here, but some very particularly attractive ones in tourism, in agroforestry, in cashews, and then focusing our efforts there because resources are scarce and you got to make bets and you got to hope that the investment you make pays off. So starting from that sort of outside-in approach, and this is sort of a business approach. Where are you going to put your bets? Where are you going to make your investments? Then we work back to the entrepreneur or to the community. Now, as you think about businesses or value chains for any particular business, you would do that here. That's what we do in the countries in which we work. So think about something that you might eat today, and think working back from there. There's a whole lot of steps that have to happen in that value chain to get from the farm to the table. That's the first analysis we do. We say, okay, there's lots of steps along here. Where are there opportunities for us working with entrepreneurs to get involved and to exploit opportunities and market inefficiencies, to build businesses around them? And by the way, are the ways that we can do that so some of the value comes back closer to poor farmers? Because if you think about it, you know, any product that you buy for $10 here, there's probably something like 5 to 10 cents that's going to a smallholder farmer in the country in which it was produced. Are there ways to make that piece of the pie bigger the closer you get back to the farm gate? And that's part of our mission as well. We identify the business model, and you'll see this, and we've laid out our approach. Well, we've done it here, starting back here and saying, okay, what's the business? And then saying, what is the particular opportunity in that business? And then we say, all right, where's the entrepreneur in all this? And who is that person with whom we're going to work to build a business and to exploit the opportunity we're trying to exploit? So once again, it's and part of what we're doing with Google is a process of helping to identify entrepreneurs. And I want to talk more about that in a minute. But then it's working closely with that entrepreneur. It's thinking about business models. It's thinking about a business plan. It's thinking about what are the technical things we need to know to make this business succeed. And it's actually building a business. And I'm going to talk in a second about, I'll give you a very concrete example of how we do that. Get that business to some scale, and then try to replicate that experience so that you're not only affecting poverty at the level of one business, but you're doing it at an industry level. And that's ultimately our goal, because that's ultimately how you address this problem of how do we scale this? How do we take this from operating at the level of business to something that has impact for a lot more people? Because ultimately, it's those people. It's that employment, it's that job, it's that income creation, it's the wealth creation at the local level that's going to make the difference. It's going to make a sustainable difference for the communities in which we work. I'd said we're business people thinking about business solutions to rural poverty. I think just by virtue of where we come from and the kind of work that we do, we're able to partner with a large number of major corporate partners in ways that make sense for them. And part of that comes down to speaking the language of business. But part of it, too, comes down to being able to identify opportunities for corporations, real market opportunities for corporations to work in, say, Tanzania or Honduras in ways that they'd never done before, to get involved in a way that actually affects their bottom line. And part of what we do is try to work with both entrepreneurs and corporations to link the two, to say, all right, there's a value chain here. If you're Pete's Coffee, can you plug into a value chain that we've built with Tanzanian coffee farmers for sources of your coffee? And if we can put that partnership together, Pete's wins, smallholder farmers in Tanzania win, and that's a sustainable model. That's going to be around 5 years from now, 10 years from now, long after TechnoServe has left. We also partner with organizations like McKinsey for obvious reasons, and we do that in both formal ways and informal ways. I guess the informal I've characterized. We have a lot of ex-McKinsey people working for. But we've done global studies, for example, on coffee competitiveness and where is the global coffee market going, and then therefore where should TechnoServe be making its bets in terms of developing the coffee industry. Google, I sure want to talk a lot more about that partnership, and I will do that at in the second half of the presentation. I should say, too, that this business ethic in our board of directors, similarly, they like you, are successful entrepreneurs or involved with successful entrepreneurial endeavors, or they're investors, or they're business people who have that mentality. So I want to emphasize throughout that business can be a solution to rural poverty. Business people in these countries are going to be the catalyzers for that, but there are opportunities for business people in the United States and in the developed world, too, to make a difference. And they can do that either by working to strike up partnerships that affect their businesses as they do enterprise in those countries, or to work more closely with businesses. And we provide opportunities to do that. And I want to tell you a little bit about the end of this presentation about opportunities for Googlers actually do some of just that. Now I want to talk a little bit about, make this more concrete for you, about our experience in Mozambique with cashews. Because I can theorize about all this, but it's only when you actually bring it down to actual examples that it is real at all. And as I said, a few years ago we went into Mozambique and we said, all right, Mozambique, and I don't know how many of you know Mozambique's history, but until probably the early 70s, Mozambique was a real African success story, particularly economically. It was a powerhouse. And then for the succeeding 15 years, it was racked by civil war and a failed experiment with Marxism, such that several million people died and industry was decimated. And it's been a very slow road back for that country. We came to Mozambique 6 years ago and did this sort of industry scan. So what makes sense here for Mozambique? Again, thinking as you would think about what are real sources of opportunity here. And one of those sectors was cashew. Until 1970, Mozambique was the world's largest exporter of cashews. And I bet there are people sitting in this room who may know what country now is the leading exporter of cashews. It is India by a long shot, of both raw cashews and processed cashews. But Mozambique, by virtue of climate, by virtue of culture, by virtue of a history of it, and by virtue of labor costs, we thought had real opportunities in the cashew business. We also thought, not just raw cashews, but why not do some processing in country? And again, why that? Because that's a chance to bring value back to Mozambique. Because a lot of the value in this gets captured in the people who process it, the people who package it, the people who market it, the people who distribute it. Can some of that come back closer to farmers? We actually identified a manufacturing process in India that had been used in India for about 15 years. Pretty labor intensive, but nevertheless a real processing, critical processing step. There's a technology that we brought back into Mozambique. And then we identified Antonio Miranda, who was our sort of touchstone entrepreneur in that case. And I would say that the entrepreneurs we work with are not necessarily the very poorest of the poor. It's difficult to start a business. It's difficult to start one here, having been involved in startups, most of them less successful than Google. And it's 10 times as difficult in the developing world, where things that we just take for granted, infrastructure, communications, networks, access to capital, just does not exist. And in that context, it takes people with some real entrepreneurial vision, and it helps to have an education, it helps to have some access to whatever networks they are. So we're not talking about the poorest of the poor. Our target ultimately is the poorest of the poor. Those are the people who have jobs. Those are the people who are providing inputs into these businesses. Antonio himself had a college education. He'd fled the country in the Civil War. He came back intent on starting a business, and his family had been involved in cashews before. We worked with Antonio for about 2 years, very intensively, and it's like management consulting. We helped him get the business concept. We helped him write the business plan. We worked with him on getting access to capital for his initial investment. We had a guy sleeping in a tent with him up in the northern part of the country for 3 months as they built this factory. And in 2002, Antonio opened his first factory. It employs about 300 people. This is in an area of Mozambique where there's no formal employment. It is destitute, extremely poor. And I've had opportunities to visit it, and you fly in there today on it's a pretty bumpy trip in, but you see what some economic activity, cash-based activity in an area can do. You see it's not just at the plant, but you see it in little businesses that are now growing up around the plant to support it, to provide inputs, to provide retail now to people who have cash for the first time. And so you see this follow-on effect that comes out of it, not to mention the fact that you now have 300 people working there. His first year in business, he had something like $800,000 in revenues. Again, employed these people and was profitable. His second year, he opened a second plant, and since then we've opened 11 more of these plants in Mozambique. And at this point, they have had the effect of revitalizing an industry. And that's the kind of impact that we want to have. But again, it's working through every one of these steps. So working with Antonio, helping to actually improve some of the, enabling some of the regulatory constraints that are faced in a lot of these countries. Many times it's legal constraints, it's tax restraints that make it very difficult to do a business. And we try to help at that intersection to work through those constraints as they affect that business. And again, up here, I want to talk a little bit about this Mozambique brand. These 11 cashew entrepreneurs we helped them organize last year into a trade association. And they together, it's actually a privately held company with shareholders, and they collect their product for export. And they ensure that the quality is right, that the phytosanitary conditions are met for export. And as a bulk exporter now, they have marketing power and bargaining power as they deal with importers in Europe and the United States. We worked with Young and Rubicam to come in and help them brand this. That's the Mozambique brand. It's now available in the United States, and I think, well, it may not be available in your stores, but if you go to Arizona, I know they're eating a lot of it down there. And ultimately, that's the group that's going to take over where we leave off. Our job ultimately is to work ourselves out of a job, right? And they now are taking over things like training, about capturing of best practices, and about promulgating the continued success of what they've been able to achieve so far. In 3 years from now, we're not going to be working in cashews in Mozambique. Now, that said, we're now beginning to roll that out in other parts of Africa. And again, here's some of the impact last year, some of, of what I've described. Last year, these 14 plants, Antonio has 2 and so does another, produced a lot of cashews. Purchased cashews for the first time in a really regular way from 40,000 farmers who received premiums for their product that they just hadn't had before. And that premium translates into real, tangible, life-altering benefits for people. I mean, the difference between 50 cents a day, $1 a day, $1.50 a day for farm is tremendous, and created employment at the same time. That's our baseline of business. It's thinking smart, thinking like business people about interventions, about working with people, about catalyzing their efforts, and then ultimately it's about leaving. But leaving behind what we hope are working businesses and industries. And again, it's an approach I think that people in the private sector can appreciate much more readily than people who are traditionally the providers of what we call international development. I thought it would be interesting. Larry Page actually came and looked at some of our work in Kenya around some dairy producers there in May of last year. I want to show you a quick video that highlights basically what he saw, and I'd like for you to sort of get a glimpse to the work we're doing there.
In 2002, the dairy farmers in Yala asked TechnoServe to come in and assist them to set up a milk bulking and cooling center that would make dairy farming a viable option as a business and as a way of life. On the first day of intake, we got in excess of 1,000 liters of milk supplied by more than 500 farmers. Nyala has continued to grow. Today, Nyala is a 10,000 liter cooling center. They turn over in excess of $800,000 every year in sales, and the cooling plant itself supports 3,500 farmers and indirectly impacts more than 20,000 families in the town, Ndaragwa, where the cooling plant is based.
This town was completely, almost dead. There wasn't any life at all. No business. But now, the people are very busy here. Some are doing metal work. Even photocopiers are here now. Now, Nyala is a blessing.
The people who have invested in our savings and credit account are already reaping fruits. The farmer can buy one of the best of the cows and build a good house. The farmer can pay school fees for their children. We shall have now made it very able for the students of this area all to acquire education. I'm sure after about 1 or 2 years, we shall be able to stand on our own through the advice that we have got from TechnoServe. In the past, people have blamed everything on poverty. But now, Nyara is showing people that they can fight poverty from their own gardens.
The prices of milk have gone up.
That's good news to me.
And once we bring a farmer who has been selling 2 liters to sell 20, then poverty will be a thing of the past.
Thank you very much.
That's at one level. Let me show you another short clip from some of the work that we're doing in
This is the story of 2 entrepreneurs, Victor y Mercedes Pareja.
TechnoServe vinieron a la zona baja de Quebrada.
You read that?
Ahí empezamos nosotros a ir a las reuniones. Ya empezaron ellos a visitarnos acá.
Nos acercamos a ellos por la experiencia que ya los amigos habían tenido y bueno, estaban resolviendo algunos problemas con plagas que en la zona pues no, porque traían personal capacitado, que es lo más importante, porque a uno le pueden regalar cualquier cosa, pero si no sabe qué hacer con ella, es como que no le den nada.
We show to them that the real problem is not the market. The real problem is how to have a permanent production of vegetables.
El mercadeo que es muy importante porque si uno no sabe dónde vender, lo va a vender muy barato. Estaban ellos ahí para ayudarnos, ¿no? Y traían muchas cosas nuevas que nosotros no conocíamos.
Cuando no trabajamos con TechnoServe era no saber vender. TechnoServe me enseñó a cómo funciona el mercado. Esa tienda desde que yo inicié es mi cliente. Entonces yo también le llevo 2 veces por semana. Ellos son muy buenos. Son 3 cosas. No tener pena cómo vender, saber seleccionar los productos y también empacarlos. Hay diferentes tipos de empacado. El que va al mercado local, diferente al que va al súper. Todo eso lo hemos ido aprendiendo en el camino, como decimos.
Por medio de ellos, los enseñaron cómo poder trabajar. Por medio también de ellos, los enseñaron unas cajas de créditos que daban unos préstamos alquilados para poder trabajar. Yo no tengo terreno propio, se puede decir. Yo estaba trabajando de mozo de un patrón. Que yo sacaba a la semana eran $17 o $18 por ahí. Entonces, ahora no, nosotros han habido ventas buenas, muy buenas, que semanalmente nosotros hemos llegado a vender $200. Otra tecnología que nos enseñaron que el mercado pide verdura los 365 días del año, pues, y entonces es que permanecemos haciendo escalonamientos de siembra, pues, y nosotros con nuestros trabajos sostenemos al mozo también, porque no tenemos solo a él, tenemos a otros que ellos están agradecidos con el trabajo, pues. Entonces nosotros, tras de que estamos saliendo adelante, estamos sacándolos adelante a ellos también. Ha habido un mejor cambio en nuestras vidas.
Gracias a TechnoServe.
So those are little slices of TechnoServe life, and a couple points about that. One is, I said we work along the value chain. Well, you saw in one instance in dairy how we were working at the production level. You know, we were buying from farmer groups that we'd organized, but the real work was done at the level of the plant. In horticulture, in Latin America, in that Latin American example, what you were seeing was first working at the farm level to get that right, and you saw those sort of mini greenhouses. That actually was a pretty big breakthrough for farmers in that area. But then further up the value chain, we were working to establish linkages with in-country supermarkets. It's not always about exporting to the United States. Many of the real vibrant markets for what we do are actually in-country. It's just getting the supply chain right along that. And again, it's applying business principles. I want to talk a little bit about another set of activities we do, which is very relevant to you here at Google, and that is around trying to build entrepreneurial capacity in a lot of the countries that we work in. And Cheryl had mentioned at the outset that Google is working with TechnoServe in Ghana on an entrepreneurial development program which is anchored around a business plan competition. And it's a national business plan competition. And this is, we've sort of highlighted here some of the things that we think about when we think about business plan competitions generally. But there's two things going on here. One is about a process by which you can actually help jumpstart and start actual working businesses. And there's something else that's happening too. By virtue of that process, by virtue of the examples, you start to get a bead on building an entrepreneurial culture. Because in many of the countries we work, that just is not there. Now I will say that that's in contrast to some of the other countries where we might work in the future. But part of our mandate in these countries, we feel, is to help to establish that. And the business plan competitions are a great way to do that. Now, as we think about the plans that we run, and as we work through some of the planning with Rachel and others on our program in Ghana, one of the important things to us, in the spirit of leaving programs behind, we can't work there, we got to work ourselves out of a job, is to help build local capacity and interest in the local business community in making these programs work and making them succeed. Because one, there are many benefits to the country in that, but two, we hope that there are actually business benefits for the business community in seeing a development of a thriving small business sector. And again, that is part of our objective and is part of the approach that we use as we go along. Now, this business plan model that we use actually came out of McKinsey. McKinsey designed a business plan competition in Germany in the mid-90s in an attempt to stimulate more entrepreneurial thinking, particularly in East Germany. They took that actual model down to South Africa. A lot of people who work at TechnoServe came out of McKinsey South Africa, and we've adopted that to use in the developing world. Now, the way it works, and the way, and I'll describe a little more about how it's going to work in Ghana, is relatively straightforward. We market these broadly, and you know, in the Ghana case, it'll be marketed nationally. And you know, guess what? Even if people don't participate, there's finally some attention paid to the role of business and the possibilities of business, and this in environments where that just is not highlighted. So marketed broadly, and from that you solicit business concepts, and through a sort of a gradual winnowing process, you whittle that down to a workable number of business concepts. From there, it's a process of training, and I actually want to spend more time on this when we talk about Google specifically. Training, one-on-one training, classroom training, mentorship opportunities for people in the business community as you, again, refine the business plans and work that number of competitors down to what in the end is a set of winning business plans. But again, it's training, it's mentoring and coaching, it's designating the winners, and then really importantly, and I think we've only learned this over time, it's not enough just to say you won, great. There's prize money at the end that'll help seed your business, but it's not enough just to say then go out into the world. Aftercare, what we call aftercare, it's apparent is often the difference between a successful business that comes out of this and one that doesn't. And aftercare is often around things like continued access to capital. It's some of the things that, as you know, business incubators, incubator services, shared services for some of these small businesses. What we call business development services. Can we get the local accountants, consultants, banking sector involved with, active with these businesses in ways that actually help them but also help the businesses? And it's networking opportunities for the alums. Now, I said we'd started this a number of years ago, first in Latin America. So we've rolled this out gradually over time, trying to perfect the model. And I will tell you that even in TechnoServe, we started with some skepticism. I mean, does this really work? In the sense that long-term it creates businesses. And I'll talk about that, but over time we've learned that it has. I'll share some numbers with you. So we ran a program in El Salvador several years ago, a second one, Nicaragua 2 years ago, a second one in Nicaragua. We're running a third run in Nicaragua this year. And again, we're expanding these in Latin America, and this year for the first time, we're taking the model to Africa. So you see listed here in 2006 a number of the national business plan competitions we'll be doing in Africa. We're also considering plans, implementing one towards the end of the year in Nigeria. And again, that will be with Google's support. We're looking at Mozambique as well. Now, as I say, there was some skepticism even within TechnoServe about does this model really work in a developing country context. And what we found, based on, as you saw this sort of trajectory, is in Central America, think about a program that has, ultimately it works with, intensively with 60 businesses, 50, 60 businesses. Those are the ones that get the intensive hands-on training. We went back and looked at some of the results of these a couple of years out and saw that in terms of just people trained, about 317 entrepreneurs or small partnerships. Out of that, we had 72 new businesses and 91 expanded businesses based on their experience with business plan competitions. That's over 150 businesses out of about 300. That's a 50% success rate. That's damn good in any country. That's better than you'll do here. And some of that, I'll tell you, is a function of what the training you get. Some of it is a function of a very real phenomenon in these countries. I said it's very hard to start a business, but if you can get it right, there are market inefficiencies and market opportunities there that can really be exploited in ways to make businesses successful. So coming out of that process, we created almost 1,000 jobs. And we're pretty precise about how we measure our own impact. So we invested something like $1.4 million in these 3 business plan competitions. We had revenues, incremental revenues, because that's the only thing we feel like we can measure. It's what are the additional revenues that came out of this, of about $8 million in the first couple of years. So that's a heck of a return on your initial investment. And these businesses, I mean, that's just going to keep on giving long after our involvement. So to date, these kinds of results show us that this is a pretty powerful way of actually creating businesses that work. And you can see here, I mean, there are quantitative measures of this, but oftentimes the most fulfilling thing is for us to talk to people who have actually started businesses themselves. And yeah, you can see some quotes here from, you know, a variety of the entrepreneurs with whom we've worked. And understand this is often in a context where there just is not support for these kinds of activities. This is new oftentimes, and it's certainly a pretty new phenomena in Ghana. So we're also, you know, branding these programs progressively. I think that's important. So Idea to Impress is the brand that we're using in Latin America. Jitihada is the brand name that we're taking to market in Kenya, and that means effort in Swahili. And the brand down here at the bottom, Believe, Begin, Become, is the brand that we've collectively worked to in Ghana around the competition that we're starting now, and again, with support from you guys. All of them are intended to convey effort, self-motivation, and belief. And even the, I know I'm not a brand guy myself, but the ladder, this is a ladder. It's meant to be, it's the entrepreneurial ladder, and you'll see it gets progressively smaller the further up you go. One, it's hard to get further in starting a business, but two, there's progressively less involvement by other people. It's more and more on your own the further you get up the ladder, and that's how it should be. So let's talk about the specific stuff we're doing with Google in Ghana. I don't know if many of you know much about Ghana. There's about 21 million people living there. 45% of them are desperately poor. That is, they're living on less than $1 a day. The actual income per capita in the country is $380. They've had their own government problems over the last, as have many African countries, over the last 30 years, but they seem to have in place a nascent but thriving real constitutional democracy. About 60% of the labor force is involved in agriculture, and of course that's oftentimes the sector in which we work. So Believe, Begin, Become. That's the brand, and that's the program with which Google and TechnoServe are now involved in design. But let me sort of lay out for you the process, and it does track what I described up front as kind of a general process for these. At this point, we're planning on kicking this off in March. And again, that's this broad marketing on a nationwide basis to would-be entrepreneurs. Now, we'll tell you, when we announced this in, I guess it was November, that itself got a whole lot of attention in Ghana. You may not think Google means much in pretty remote parts of the world, but it sure has traction in Ghana. We're talking about an international brand. And we had calls from universities, we had calls from entrepreneurs, we had calls from government officials, all of whom were excited about it and somehow wanted to be involved in this phenomena, in part because it's a model that works, in part because we've been in Ghana for almost 30 years, and in part because Google was involved with this. So understand the power that the Google brand has to actually mobilize people to do good in developing parts of the world. So, again, we're kicking off in March, and again, it follows the pattern that I laid out, but more precisely, we expect to get over 500 to 1,000 submissions. Who knows ultimately how many that will be, and winnow those down over time. So the first tranche, we'll have 250 to 300 who we will bring in for a one-day business planning workshop. And out of that ought to come more tightly, more coherent business concepts. There'll be a further winnowing process, and again, we'll get down to a workable number of about 60, and in June kick off a pretty intensive business training process with them that goes on for some of these competitors over the next several months. And again, that's one-on-one training, it's classroom training, it's mentorship opportunities, particularly with business people from the local community, although there may be similar opportunities for people in this room, and I want to talk about that. In July, we expect to get down to a group of 20 finalists, and then we will select winners September, October kind of time frame. And those winners will receive cash for their businesses, but also, importantly, I talked about this aftercare component, they'll also receive, through a voucher program, the vouchers that they can use to engage, again, local providers of business services, whether it's a consulting firm, an auditing firm, if they need legal help, they can use those vouchers to engage that. And again, that helps their business, and it really helps. There's an ecosystem that has to happen around this, and it's not just the business itself, right? Those services are important if you're trying to build an overall entrepreneurial context in which these businesses can thrive. So I talked about opportunities for Googlers, and we have been working pretty closely with the folks here at google.org to identify what some of those might be. And there may be people in this room who should take note and who may be in Ghana in mid-2006. And we've sort of laid out a matrix here of different ways that we can engage with Googlers. Most immediately would be to actually be working with entrepreneurs in Ghana. And there may be some opportunities to do that. Similarly, working virtually with individual entrepreneurs from Hyderabad or from Mountain View or wherever it might be. Or program support for the overall program efforts, both in Ghana, in country, and again, remotely. These are some examples of the kind of work that we've outlined that might be possible for Googlers. And I think there are in this organization probably thousands of people who unbeknownst to them, could actually be very helpful. As I'm trying to say all along, what you know is useful. The kind of things that you do every day are really, really useful. Your knowledge base is useful in fighting poverty, and this is a very, very immediate way in which you can do that and really get involved. Whether it's actually evaluating business plans, and this is opportunities in Ghana, there are guest lecture opportunities. Again, I described classroom opportunities that we make available to the entrepreneurs in the competition. It's working, again, this one-on-one engagement. You take on maybe 3, 5, quote-unquote, clients in the process. We will have an awards ceremony, and at which we hope to have senior Google representation in Ghana, where we award the 10 winners of the competition. And then there will be documented program support just generally as we really get through the heart of the competition itself with the one-on-one engagement with the 60 entrepreneurs, and that's over a three-month period. And again, some of these opportunities you can actually do remotely as well, although some obviously lend themselves much more closely to work on the ground. And you'll see some of those are exactly the same. So again, these dates are approximate, and the commitments are approximate. But there will be opportunities, and there will be ways for you to work with the team here to express your interest in those in the days and weeks ahead. Now, I don't know if any of you are taking notes, and this will all be available, I'm told, on the Google website. But here's the information you need actually to get involved. And so with that, I should shut up, because I feel like I've been talking. And just to see if there are any questions either about TechnoServe or about international development more broadly or about the competition itself.
Yeah. So there are poorer countries in Africa than Ghana or Mozambique or El Salvador, like Somalia. also are Botswana. Are we doing anything there in those countries?
In Botswana or
Somalia?
Or Somalia? The question is TechnoServe or TechnoServe and Google doing work in Botswana, in particular countries, Botswana, Somalia, did you say Mozambique? No. Okay, good, we talked about Mozambique. We are not, but there's probably two reasons. One is a lot of the work that we do ultimately depends on funding. So we get private sector donors, corporations, and we use that to leverage government funding. And we have worked in Botswana in the past and likely will in the future. And I'd love for us to see if we could do something together, either on this model or another model with Google in Botswana. Somalia, again, TechnoServe has been there historically. It's a hard place to work right now, just because of the instability and security concerns. And again, there's not a lot of, unfortunately, donor support for going in there. But we're keenly interested in what evolves there, just as we are in southern Sudan, where, these are post-conflict, in some cases, states where there actually are opportunities to get in and to begin to lay the groundwork for real economic growth. We had a team on the ground in Liberia in December assessing opportunities there. And there's real hope for Liberia now for the first time in a very long time. Just had democratic elections, and those seem to be free and fair. And this is a country sick of civil war. And really, the infrastructure has been destroyed. Once thriving industries have been destroyed. We think there are opportunities to go back there and build those up again. And we will do it. And I think there may be opportunities for us to do that with Google. And as I mentioned, we're now contemplating seriously doing something in Nigeria, which is a different profile of a country, with Google.
I was wondering, what's the financial relationships you have with first the private investors like Google or others investing, and then with the entrepreneurs that you're finding or the different stages that you're going in helping the businesses, what kind of financial relationships does TechnoServe have?
The question is, what kind of financial relationships does TechnoServe have, both with partners, with funders, with potential investors, I would say, and with the businesses that we work with? And let me take those one at a time. With the businesses that we work with, we do collect some nominal fee, but I will tell you it's a nominal fee, and it's to ensure the seriousness of the endeavor. But we are what I would call a smart subsidy to catalyzing that business or that industry, and we say that is just the way it is. We need to get these businesses going. We need to kickstart them. We need to catalyze that growth. So it is ultimately donor funding that's funding most of what we do, and that's our relationship oftentimes with what I'd call pure donors. It's we conceive of a program, we may shape it with the donors, and with their funding we go in and provide the programmatic support. Then there's a class of relationships with corporations, which in some instances we're working with them to identify market opportunities. There may be actually fees in it for us if we can do that, but there are actual business opportunities for them. So we play a catalyzing role. That kind of relationship may be funded by a donor, but it happens to redound to the benefit of the corporation. And then there's an emerging relationship with investors themselves. Increasingly access to capital is a requirement to run and grow successful business anywhere in the world. It is so much more difficult in these developing countries. But there are an increasing number of interested financial intermediaries who think that there may be opportunities in Africa, in Latin America, in developing countries. So you see it from a couple ways. You see people putting together equity funds or debt funds to invest in these countries. And you see, when we hope ultimately this really happens, you see the commercial banking sector thinking differently about how to fund these small and medium-sized businesses. Our role in that is twofold. We don't run a fund, although we have been encouraged to run a fund in part because we're so close to these businesses. But the role we can play in that is to actually bring businesses to these funds. Often it's the experience that there's actual money, but they can't find good businesses on the ground. We're on the ground. We're working with good businesses. In things like the Google Business Plan competition, we're very close to that, so we can identify. And then there's a role for technical assistance post-investment. So after the investment, TechnoServe will come in and actually help the investees as they take their businesses to scale.
Well, thank you, Bruce.
Thank you. Get involved.